So it appears that there's a big debate going on about something called critical race theory. Now, I personally had no clue what critical race theory was, and did some looking. And apparently, critical race theory is essentially this theory about how racism is more embedded in society and the institutions and the systems that exist, the societal systems, rather than individual and psychological racist thoughts, and that's where most of the racism comes from. And now what's going on is a lot of states, Republican states, are literally banning the teaching of this, which is crazy. I didn't even know you could just straight up ban something from being taught through legislation. Kind of bizarre. It says teachers across the country are on edge amid the heated national debate over critical race theory, as Republican lawmakers in multiple states have passed or introduced legislation that would limit how race and racism are discussed in classrooms. Leaders at professional educators associations and unions say the measures have led to uneasiness among some educators about what the legislative push means for classroom discussions going forward, while others are using their collective voice to object to the bills they say are unnecessary and dangerous. So it says the bills offered by Republicans prohibit teaching that the U.S. is fundamentally or systemically racist, that traits such as a hard work ethic were created by a particular race to oppress another race, or that individuals by virtue of their race are inherently responsible for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race, among other things. Now, some people are saying that this is actually like a straw man type of thing for critical race theory, like, oh, that's not actually critical race theory kind of thing. That's what some people are saying. I'm not really sure, but the idea that systemic this is a big issue, I think, because I think that the more that you skirt away from racism and the history of how poorly, not only African Americans, obviously they got the brunt of the worst, but all, Native American, literally every race you could possibly think of that's come to the United States has basically come to lots of harassment and just torture, essentially. Skirting away from this is not going to help you in the future. The best way, and you can see this with countries that had a dark past that were able to overcome it, like Germany, for example. You have to essentially confront your past, and you have to move forward knowing what you did in the past and correcting for it, because if you don't acknowledge what you did in the past, how are you going to correct for it if you don't even agree that it exists? And so systemic racism is real, 100%, definitely. Systemic racism essentially means that, there's no laws on the books that are directly, de jure, type of racism, but that the way that the institutions and laws are set up are racist, in its nature. And so, you can see things like studies that explain that, people with black sounding names, despite having all other factors controlled for, are less likely to get a phone call than someone with a white name. Again, when controlling for all other factors, we see that black people get more punishment for the same crimes, again, controlling for all factors. And studies that include anything you could possibly think of. There are studies that include every factor you could possibly think of that maybe would be some kind of confounding factor. Maybe like there's a lot of crime in this area, but those things don't fully account for this discrepancy that exists. And so, white people are less likely to be given a charge with the mandatory minimum sentence. And so there's just racism at all levels, essentially. And when you talk about even just, obviously after, the slaves were freed in the United States, they weren't really given any reparations, right? So they were enslaved and then they were let go to do what they could, even though there were like black codes in states like Mississippi and in the South where they really couldn't do what they wanted anyways. They were never given any reparations. The 40 acres and a mule didn't happen. And so you're talking about that kind of a situation versus, who's more prone towards poverty, right? So the system is fundamentally racist, essentially. I mean, if you're black in the United States, you have it way harder than essentially anybody else in the United States, because you're set back so far based on all these things, and the United States has done literally fucking nothing to confront this past and to fix it. And when it comes to the responsibility over what your ancestors did, you're not responsible necessarily for their actions. But I would say that you're responsible, at least in some part, to, solving the issue. of what happened. Like you should feel like, okay, yeah, we should make this right, essentially. And when it comes to even like reparations now, I think you can make a pretty sound argument for why there should even be reparations now. It's incredibly unpopular, obviously. But I think you can make a pretty sound argument given that everything that even people who didn't contribute to slavery in any way, you did benefit from a system today that was built on the backs of slaves. So, essentially you're benefiting from that and you're in debt to them, essentially. So you can make a pretty sound argument for that. So this is pretty dumb to see, because if you don't confront your past, you're just simply never going to get in the right direction. But these Republican states are pretty fucking backwards and stupid. So that's essentially what's going on.